Scene TF, C4, slate 2, take 1.
The world design really came from our love for sci-fi and cyberpunk. We draw inspiration from, a lot of works in the genre, both movies and games and comic books. And we really wanted to make a world that is not just Earth. We wanted something that was a bit more fantastical, that could, stand on its own a little bit. And that's why we really went for having a wide array of characters, because, in this type of game, with the camera being a bit more zoomed out, you don't really appreciate as much of the fine details. So we can't build characters like that. We have to work with a much broader canvas, bigger brush strokes. So we have aliens that are, really tall and bulky, and we have little small aliens with floppy ears and stuff like that. So we really tried to push that variety and the sense that there's a world with lots of things going on here. So for example, in this clip, we're walking along the node, which is a meeting point for a lot of people there. Lots of trading, both legal and not so legal things.
Look, you can pawn your organs there, Flesh. Looks like a good deal.
And really pushing the density, a lot of people here going about their business, shopping, selling things, really trying to push home the fact that this is a world that exists there, not just for the player's sake, but also when the player is not there.
We always talked about taking cover because it's part of any shooty game, really, that sometimes you need to stay safe. And covers were already in the environment in the sense that we had walls and obstacles and all of that. But we didn't have an explicit cover system, so we started making beautiful blinking purple covers that we just placed around in the world all over to say, this is cover, this is cover. And we let those sit in the game for several months just to make sure that we got that right, because as long as they're just blinking purple blocks, it's easy and anyone can do it, including non-artists. And then when we said, this feels good, then we could have the artists come in and start replacing these purple blocks with proper cover. And that's the stuff you see here. Those were probably 2 purple blocks at some point. This might have been a purple block. And the funny thing is that we from very early on said we wanted something with more depth in the gameplay. And us coming from a very strong background of third-person and first-person shooters, aiming is a big part of that, right? And the majority of said games, you can lift your gun. But we couldn't do that with the camera perspective, but we can still get that sense of being a more active participant in the combat. So when you raise your gun, it actually lifts height-wise, because usually these games are pretty flat. Oh, actually, this is, if we pause here, this is an excellent example. This is just a cover, but it's waist high. So by what we already had in the game, we could say that when you lift your gun, you will shoot over it. And what we needed now was just that we needed to have the AI basically crouch more, because the player could crouch and peek up. So we needed the enemies to be able to do the same thing. So if an enemy is crouched behind cover, you can't hit him without circling around it. And if he's standing up, you can be crouching and still shooting over the cover. So we can play this, and I think there's going to be some actually shooty bits here. Yeah, so now we're crouching behind the covers, and we're taking those guys out, and they can't hit me without walking around the thing or actually throwing grenades or doing special attacks that's different. So everything kind of fell into place very elegantly for us. We worked with what we found, and we got this new core loop, which was try to always adapt and always move to a good place right now. And that's something that really made for a really nice and new kind of combat loop.
Now, our system that is key to the game is the so-called encounter system, which is basically responsible for populating the world with combat and other encounters. So the objective was to create a system that would be flexible enough to change the way it generates encounters and populates the world, because we really needed to be able to say that we want different kinds of encounters. So all of a sudden we maybe wanted to change the ratio of melee enemies against ranged enemies, or we wanted to be able to say that we want some special enemies in this proportion or another. And the usual way of doing that is usually script that. So a level designer would just go and decide, like at this location, maybe there is like a chance of spawning a unique encounter, right? But that would still be manual effort. It would be predetermined. Whereas in our case, it's completely procedural. So the system decides when, what to spawn, in what quantities, and so on and so forth. So here, for example, we can see a couple of tough enemies on the outside of the shop, and the player wisely chooses to not engage them. But that encounter over there, it was generated by the system, so it placed those specific tough enemies this particular time around. Next time around you go there, there might be no enemies at all, or it may be like a unique encounter, or like an ambush or something. And this propagates throughout the entire game. So, for example, here we can see the player running across this narrow ledge, and the system placed an ambush. So we actually see like enemies ambushing the player by running out of the doors and from behind and whatnot. The next time around, that might not be there, and the system can do all that. The thing that's probably not super obvious initially is that spawning enemies at random doesn't really work. What you really want is a controlled random, right? So a system that would be capable of processing various parameters and resolving them into an encounter that looks random, but it really isn't. It is carefully composed by the system. So for example, when you see a common encounter, the system said we want this many melee enemies and that many ranged enemies. But then the next time the system may say, okay, I want to place an ambush here. Another time it may be like I don't want to spawn regular enemies, and I want to generate an encounter made out of unique special enemies only. So you would encounter maybe 5 snipers standing in a group. Of course, you don't want that to happen very often, but from time to time that can actually be a memorable experience.
If I'm crouching behind a cover somewhere, the AI on his side of the cover will never be able to see me because the cover's in the way and I'm crouching, so I'm below his aim height high, right? And for that, we needed basically a flanking behavior where they start moving into positions where they can attack you. But that's where the cool thing with the melee enemies come in, because they can't do anything from afar really, except a few that can throw grenades and stuff. But so they will always be the thing trying to get around the cover you're in. And obviously you don't want that. And some enemies will just stay behind cover, crouched. Now you need to get around, or you need a special tool, for example a grenade or something else with a trajectory, so that you can take him out. So you're on kind of equal footing, but you're definitely stronger and there's more of them. So here, for example, we have a guy with a bat, and you know he's going to run around, and that's why he got so close. You could easily take him out, while that guy with the rifle stayed behind a bit. Same thing over there by the door. They have ranged weapons, so they don't need to get close. That guy that we just killed, and this guy, they're trying to get into cover, so they're doing the same thing that you were doing a moment ago, which is kind of cool. And there's a lot of these natural covers happening, and then we also have some more arena-based. So right here we can already see a few covers placed to really give you an easier time to understand how can I best maneuver this fight. And the cool thing is that with this camera you have a 360-degree view, so we can spawn enemies from wherever, which is really good because that also means that you need to stay on your feet and move cover a lot. So we have this thing in the middle. It's interesting to me because it's seemingly a bad cover because there's no corner to sit safe in. It doesn't protect you from everything up top from the screen, because if they start coming from out of this building or if they start coming from here, you're not safe. But what we'll see if we play in just a moment is that the player can actually move around it and always keep adapting to wherever the combat is. So stuff like this is actually, in some cases, the best kind of cover you can find. So if we play this, so we're using it against these guys and we're perfectly safe. And now we're just moving over a bit to protect from him. We're hacking all of them to make sure they explode when killed. One thing we do love is things going boom. So everywhere there's an opportunity for an explosion, we've used it.
I consider myself an artist, and your flesh is my canvas.
We really wanted to craft a world that felt like it was a real place, that had like layers to it, all the way from just the world design, like the big buildings, and then going further down into adding the layers of life on top of that, like the people living there, like making sure that we have a wide array of different cultures, different races, but also making sure that there's stories that are told in the environments, layering on the graffiti, cables, small stories that happen everywhere in the world. And we're trying to design the levels so that there's always something interesting to look at for the players, and not just have empty spaces that are just there for combat. And we have these hub areas, it's very easy to fill them with life, but that wasn't really enough, because we really wanted to make the world feel alive. So we started including more and more characters and the civilians that are walking around. And the more we added them, the more we wanted to do with them, because we really felt that they added a lot to the world. So we started adding points of interaction for them, so they could walk around and they could do things. And we extended, what they could do and how much, animation and love we put into them. And it just kept on going, because the more we did that, then the enemies started to feel, the enemies that are in the environment, they also feel kind of static. They're just walking around. First they were just standing around, then they were walking around. And we ended up extending the same systems to the enemies, so that the enemies can go up to a vending machine and, hit it and, be angry, and then go down, sit in a sofa. So if the player doesn't engage, they will do things. Things will happen without the player, because we're really keen on extending the illusion of the game being alive for as far as we possibly could. So, for example, here we have a lot of civilians. They're having a barbecue party. And then the player was shooting and the civilians will run off. So you can just go on a murdering spree, but you can also just, shoot a little bit in the air, scare them off, make sure that you don't kill them during a combat. So we're trying to always push for more life in the world, and just trying to design areas that feel more believable.
Neon Giant today is 12 people. The thing that I really appreciate with working with a smaller studio and within the indie world is that we can be so much more flexible with what and how we do things. When I worked at places with hundreds or thousands of people, we make amazing things, but it's a very large ship that's very slow to turn, and it's very difficult to maneuver and turn. We can just do a 180. So for us, it's a really good opportunity to be able to flex those developer muscles. But let's be honest that it's not only 12 people that have touched the game. We have called in every favor we've amassed through our careers. We have worked with amazing writers, amazing audio people. We have an amazing composer that is outside of this logo to make what seems to be a game that people are really excited about.